looked at in the context of literacy and emerging literacy in particular, and language as the critical period we're discussing is very relevant to looking at how the anti-literacy laws and emerging literacy, and how language and reading is, you know, I don't want to say developed, but growth. And the anti-literacy laws were created by white men, and the white men that we look at in child development in terms of theories, we see that these white men, Piaget, you know, to name a few, um, Piaget, Vygotsky, all these individuals were white, and they were creating a knowledge base of child development in terms of how children learn to read or learn language, and how language is very important. Martin Luther King mentioned that, someone told a lie, and it's, in the language, and the language of, he was speaking of the word black. So when we look at the critical period, and the critical period in terms of children, the time frame in where children are learning to read, and during a time where the anti-literacy laws were that black children and, children, people, even free people of color, were not, it was illegal, okay, as this law um, is written between 1740 and 1834, prohibiting anyone from teaching enslaved and free people of color to read or write. The purpose of, this is a blog by Carlos Maddox, January 12th, 2022. And it, details the anti-literacy laws and abolitionists, Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass mentioned in his narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, he wrote about such incident. And it's a quote here. Whilst I was saddened by the thought of losing the aid of my kind mistress, I was gladdened by the invaluable instruction which, by the merest accident, I had gained from my master. Though conscious of the difficulty of learning without a teacher, I set out with high hope and a fixed purpose, at whatever cost of trouble, to learn how to read. So even though it was a cost of trouble, maybe the cost of his life, uh, he set out to do that. And that, when I look at that, he was, looking at this critical period. And when we look at the critical period, we look at the um, research and theories and, studies that children, there's a period of time when children are, it's a window of time where they are going to gain language and know words and be able to read, and comprehend what they're reading. And this was a time when, we have the enslavement of Africans and the withholding of this knowledge base, and it was only for a certain group. So when we look at the critical period, I have to speak on the fact that these theorists know, they knew of this, Piaget, Vygotsky, and um, this was used. I'm not speaking that they used it, but it that information was used to thwart black people's growth, when it comes to literacy. So that's why that area, reading, language arts, is, a lot more likely to be, black people, African Americans, whatever you want to call us today, um, has is low, be below the bar. And because there's so many things that have been infused to thwart that. There was the anti-literacy law to thwart that. Now when that went away, there were other things put in place that may not be, people may not look at as, like that's a stretch. However, these laws, they just don't go away, they're replaced. So the critical period, is very significant to the growth and the lifespan of an individual. And when that individual is enslaved and not getting the learning uh, during these critical periods, they're going to not know how to um, stand up for, themselves, or express themselves through written language or words. They may resort to other things that may not be good. So, and this was withheld from African Americans right here in the state of Maryland. Um, and so this PowerPoint that I created, the critical period, is based on the textbook. It's being used as a textbook, Saxton 2017, Chapter 3, that looks at the critical period hypothesis and learning how there's a certain window of time, especially when we talk about in the womb, as you see here, um, with the infant in the womb, there are critical periods during that growth. So we look at this, Lenenberg's hypothesis, um, and it sounds like he's German, so we look at that, and we look at the critical period research. We look at an interesting story because when we have this dominant culture, it's this, everything is held back for some and given to others. It's called many things. White supremacy is what I call that. And that white supremacy, when individuals are under that influence of white supremacy, they're more likely not to see uh, adversities within white families. Okay? Here's a story of Jeannie the Wild Child, who is a white family, white father, white mother, and Jeannie, their child, was under the radar, in a home, uh, and not being cared for, basically. And being under the influence of white supremacy, you're less likely to look into a home that is of white parents, because you're thinking they're right. They're going to do the right thing. Let's focus our attention on, these other people that we're trying to dominate. And this is sad because Jeannie suffered because of that. Jeannie was a collateral damage in the system of this white supremacy. And her story is being told in this PowerPoint. And this is from this, happened in 1970. And if you look at the time of 1970, black people in the US were being, killed, persecuted, all these things, all the energies of the government was on that. Similar to the anti-literacy laws, all the focus was on keeping a certain group, oppressed, and the thinking that being dominant means that I have to oppress someone, So that's the mentality. And we see there were more feral children throughout history, and most of them were white. Most of them were white. So um, we're going to look at language aspects and critical period, and the critical period. We're going to look at Jeannie as a point of reference, and a point of reference in terms of growth, and how that emerging language was thwarted. It was thwarted for her, just as it was thwarted for black children in the US during the 1800s. Um, However, unlike Jeannie, black children in the US had to work on the plantation. Jeannie was kept isolated, and she was kept in a room where she was tied to a chair, you know, um, for long periods of time, and tied to the chair, um, where she would defecate in there was a hole in the chair where she would do that. So her balance was off in terms of her legs. And we talk about physical development, and how language is used, how language is part of that physical development, um, of balance, and, being able to move your physical body. And that aspect of that is, there is a critical period for that, and Jeannie missed it. So at 14 years old, she was basically uh, not walking straight up, or walking, you know, like a child her age, her growth is supposed to be. So we go into, looking at subject, verb, and object, and how that is how language is put into framework, into sentences. So in looking at this, we're going to look at, how we can write a paragraph. And we're going to do that as an activity, how we're going to write a paragraph. So the 5 sentences is what you're doing in writing a paragraph writing. So you're going to take 10 minutes to write one sentence that introduces a topic. And you use a statistic here. You can, that sentence can include that. And remember your subject, your verb, and the object of your, sentence. I also, you 10 minutes to one sentence that signifies the importance. So we're going from here to here, and then ending here. So one sentence that signifies the importance of the topic. You can use theory here. You can use Vygotsky, Piaget, etc. One sentence that references a statistic to support this previous sentence. So what can you put in this next sentence to support this previous sentence with that theory that you mentioned, and supporting reference of a statistic to support that theory, okay? And then one sentence to recommend future research on this topic. Restate the theory here. So what do you recommend based on what you have read in these articles, based on the text about physical development and the critical period, what would you recommend based on that, based on Jeannie, situation? What would you recommend? That's in one sentence, in terms of future research on this topic. What do you recommend that, researchers should study? Restate your theory here. Okay, you're restating your theory again. Now, in the final sentence, you have one sentence to recommend or suggest a program or activity or event to support, you know, what you stated in your topic. And that ending sentence is basically you can create an activity. What kind of activity is going to support, um, this topic of Genie and, being abused in that way and being withheld from these critical periods where children need that nourishment and need that support physically, intellectually, emotionally, and socially. They need the pies. What can you recommend in a program or activity to support the pies? Okay, well, whether it's the physical, intellectual, emotional, or social that your topic is about, or maybe your topic is about child abuse, or language abuse, or child abuse is the overall topic, but the narrower topic could be language. Withholding language from a child is abuse. Um, we give the child, and it could be a child where they're not tied down to a chair, but they're moving around in the house, but you don't give them language. You don't talk to them. There's a still face situation. That is abuse as well, right? Using language in a disrespectful way or in a negative way to a child, that's abuse. That's using the language adversely. So, homework. This is what you're going to be doing for your homework. Using more than one source of information: textbooks, handout of the research article I gave in class, and lecture that I have done thus far to help explain a topic. So, the first thing is picking a topic, giving an example of a topic. And I gave you some examples. Number two, defining that topic using an operational definition. How does your topic operate? What does it look like? Number three, page 73 of Saxton, Age of Acquisition Effects in Second Language Learning. We talked about bilingualism, second language learners. On page 72, there's some information about that. Read that. Number four, deafness and late language learning on page 79 of Saxton. So you're going to read these, and then you're going to go over to this area, the critical period. What aspects of language did Jeannie acquire? What aspects of language did Jeannie fail to acquire? Given that Jeannie did acquire some aspects of language, what are the implications to Leninberg's original hypothesis? So return to Leninberg's original hypothesis, find out what that is and what his hypothesis is, and what does Jeannie's, her acquiring some aspects of language implicate for this hypothesis? And what is the relevance of the critical period hypothesis to the nature-nurture debate? So the nature-nurture debate is, gene over environment. Is it your genetics, or is it being supported physically, intellectually, emotionally, and socially? Or is it a combo? So that is, looking at the relevance of the critical period hypothesis to that. And we look at the attachment theory in there too, because the attachment theory states that, when children attach healthy attachments, they're more likely to thrive And these are critical periods when they need that attachment, especially during infancy, even but before birth. um, we need that attachment. Talking to the baby inside the womb is an example of that. So when we look at that nature nurture debate, we're looking at these pieces of influence in that individual's life, whether it's genetics or whether it's that, upbringing um, that they had. Okay, so that is the end of the presentation, and thank you for joining. Any questions, you just send me an email, and we can have a virtual meeting to discuss any questions that you have. Have a great day.